Moving on from, now that we know what mobility is, moving on to basic mobility practice that I'm going to explore today. This is a practice that I learned from the Functional Range Systems folks when I did my Functional Range Conditioning Mobility Specialist certification. And this practice is called controlled articular rotations. And this is the daily routine, or otherwise known as the morning routine, morning CARS. CARS is in controlled articular rotation. Going back to our definition of mobility, that keyword being control, this is really about now exploring our active range of motion with that element of control. So I'm on my knees here. I'm going to demonstrate a shoulder CAR. We can do this in any joint, but the shoulder is a nice kind of obvious movement pattern that we can kind of explore. And the shoulder joint, because it's a ball and socket joint, it actually has a lot of movement to it. So it can do this bigger kind of circumnavigational movement, making that big arm circle, but it also rotates within the joint as well. So you may notice as I rotate my arm through that range of motion, I am also rotating that humerus within the joint, moving into internal rotation and moving into external rotation as I also move that arm bone through, or my arm through that bigger circular action. So I did those a bit quick. That was a pretty loosey-goosey CARS. When we do CARS, there's some principles that we really want to adopt to make that as safe and effective and maximize the gains as possible. And in fact, you can take the CARS into all sorts of different techniques and strategies and positions to really up the ante as far as what you're getting out of them and really chase mobility gains. The practice I'm introducing today is more of a mobility maintenance practice, a practice you might do ideally every day, and the premise is really just about giving your joints a taste of all the different shapes and positions that they can still get into at least a couple times a day, because we now know that as far as joint health is concerned, joints are very much a don't use it, you lose it sort of piece of hardware. So when we don't move our joints through their full range of motion, gradually that structure changes over time and we start losing access to different shapes and positions. So this is really just an opportunity to start to explore those different shapes and positions that might not be involved in your day as much. So shoulders being a classic example that we may, kind of live here a fair bit. So the CARS gets us taking our shoulder into some positions at least a couple times a day that we might not see very often. Why would we do CARS? Well, we have a growing understanding around joint health. We know when we move our joints through their full pain-free range of motion that we see an increase in fluid movement and circulation, meaning we increase fluids and oxygenated blood and nutrients into the joint capsule, into the tissues that make up the joint. We remove waste products. We even see a natural anti-inflammatory process that occurs when joints are moved within their pain-free, safe range of motion. We see a neuromuscular effect, so we see a proprioception, almost mapping of a joint space. So when we move that joint through its full range of motion, we start to give the nervous system, the brain, the central nervous system, better information about the joint's health and what's available in the joint. So when we move, most of us don't think when we move. Our movement happens reflexively, and that's actually the type of movement we want to have. We want to have reflexive movement that happens without us having to think about turning on muscles, stabilizing joints, positioning certain bits and pieces together. We want to get to that sweet spot where our movement is reflexive and we have lots of options to always choose the most efficient, least stressful movement option that's available to us. So when we give the brain and that central nervous system more information about the joint, and we take that joint into it more positions and shapes, we increase its understanding of what is available to that joint. We also are going to integrate a process called irradiation, which increases that neuromuscular system's participation in the activity. So that also kind of creates this level of intention and almost tells the system, oh, this is important, so I better stand up and pay attention. So there's a greater amount of energy and activation into that movement when we do this process. I'll introduce that in the next video. So CARs are really about, you don't use it, you lose it, so let's at least use it a couple times a day. The suggestion is that we do this in the morning, because when we sleep, while we do move a little bit, we're really not moving much in regards to the range of motion of our joints, so it's a nice way to kind of wake them up. I like to do my morning routine in the morning, but I often will work on some of my stickier joints, or the joints I have a harder time controlling over the course of the day, just during little breaks, like I'm getting a cup of coffee, or just need to get up out of a seated position if I've been on a computer or something like that. All right, so I'm gonna set us up to get into those CARs in the next video, so follow along and we'll learn about the radiation process and how to make sure that we're safe and moving appropriately through our CARs. Thanks.